I'll start with an anecdote about Uber's dynamic pricing systems. So dynamic pricing at Uber is called surge pricing. This is data from an Ariana Grande concert in 2015 at Madison Square Garden. So at the end of the concert, like at many concerts, the event let out. A lot of people started requesting rides. So surge pricing kicked in, meaning that prices were a little higher than usual. And we're looking at data on the left-hand side of the number of requests for riders for rides. And you can see that during the time period in which surge kicked in, which is what's shown in yellow in the plot on your left, the requests did still go up despite the fact that prices had risen. And we can also see that the pickup times increased a bit. The pickup time means the time between when a rider requests and when they get in the car. So those times went up from about 2 minutes to about 3.5 minutes, but still very acceptable. And then on the right-hand side, you're seeing a plot of the request completion rate, meaning that out of the riders who requested a ride, what percentage were able to get a car and get picked up. And you can see that that's staying high at 1. So really very few or no cases in which riders requested a ride and weren't able to get one. Contrast that with New Year's Eve in New York City in 2015, in which there was a surge pricing outage for half an hour. That's shown in red in these plots. So look at the plot with the requests. The requests skyrocketed during this time period. A lot of riders were not able to get cars, and so they're re-requesting. The requests go way up. What happened to ETAs? ETAs went from 2 minutes dramatically upward towards about 8 minutes. And finally, if we look at the request completion rate, it dropped to under 25%. So fewer than a quarter of riders who were requesting rides were able to get a car. So this is what I'm going to argue, that dynamic pricing in ride hailing is critical to reliability. So that's my second takeaway. There are 2 takeaways from the talk today. The first one is about matching. Matching means how do we match supply with demand? How do we match drivers with riders? And I will argue that matching in ride hailing is the key to decreasing the amount of wait time that both drivers and riders have. And I'll tell you what I mean by wait time. The second point is this point around reliability and dynamic pricing. But before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about my history at Uber. I joined Uber 2.5 years ago. I was leading data science for Uber's marketplace organization. That's the organization that creates all of Uber's pricing systems, Uber's matching systems. It did all of the data science for Uber Pool and for Uber Eats, our meal delivery service, in addition to the data science for related problems like demand and supply prediction. I've since switched to a different role at Uber where I'm leading data science for Uber Maps. So Uber is a physical logistics system. That means that every aspect of the rider experience, the driver experience, and creating a price and a match is influenced by this road network and predicting some quantities on that road network. Maps does a lot of different things. I'll just highlight one of those, which is, or 2 of those. One of those is traffic. So we predict how much traffic you'll see on any particular road at a particular time. So here I'm showing an image, which is a heat map on the road network in the San Francisco Bay Area. And you can see that the highways have the highest predicted speeds in this image. So that's shown in green. And in some of the downtown, more congested areas, you see some red, and that means that we have more congestion and slower speeds in those areas. Related to that, we have to be able to predict for any origin and any destination in the road network how long it'll take to go from A to B. Also, we need to be able to provide a recommended route from A to B. So coming to my first point about matching. So what is matching? The first question in matching is, how do we match a rider with a driver? For example, you request an UberX ride. How do we match you with a driver? The second question is around carpooling. How do we match together riders and match those riders with a driver to create an efficient real-time carpool? If we look just at that first question around dispatch for UberX, there's a simple heuristic, for example, where you can dispatch the car that has the shortest predicted pickup time. So the car that can get to the rider the fastest. So that's a simple mechanism for dispatch. And there's a variety of ways to improve this. I'll show you one example, which is called trip upgrade. Could you play the video, please? So in trip upgrade, the idea is that a rider is matched with a driver, but after that match occurs, you have an additional rider and an additional driver who come on the system. It may be more efficient, instead of matching rider B with driver B, it may be more efficient to swap the match, to update the match. That's better off for everyone, for both riders and for both drivers. So this illustration shows this, or maybe it doesn't. Here we go. Okay, so one rider, one driver. They're matched together, 6-minute ETA. Another driver comes open. Another rider requests a ride. Instead of matching them, we swap the matches, okay? Leaving everybody with a shorter pickup time. That's, again, better for drivers and better for riders. I'll show it one more time. Rider A, driver A, get matched 6-minute pickup, and then rider B and driver B, and we do the swap the match. Can you switch back to the presentation, please? Great. Notice that matching requires predicting the travel time between point A and point B. And that's part of, again, what the mapping service does at Uber. That's a really important input from maps into dispatch. So I argued that this improves wait time. What do I mean by wait time? Let's look on the driver's side. For a driver, they want to have as much time with a passenger in the vehicle paying to go to their destination as possible. So let's look at that time on trip for drivers. So let's look at percentage of time on trip for UberX drivers compared to taxi drivers. And there was an analysis done in 3 cities by Kramer and Kruger. This is based on 2015 and 2016 data, I believe. And you can see that in Boston and San Francisco, the percentage of time that drivers spend on trip is considerably higher, about 40% higher in this ride-sharing case than in taxi services. In New York City, we don't see a big difference. That's not surprising given the density of downtown New York and the fact that there's cabs on every corner in New York City. Let's look on the rider side now. On the rider side, what is wasted time? Wasted time means the time between request and pickup. So if we look at that pickup time for a street hailing service, that's shown in blue, and if we compare that to the average pickup time for the pickup time for a ride-sharing service, which is shown in blue, to the pickup time for a street-hailing service, meaning like a taxi, that's shown in green. The pickup times are considerably lower for the ride-sharing services than for the street-hailing services. On the x-axis, we're showing congestion level. It turns out that these congestion levels do impact the pickup times, but regardless of that congestion level, you're seeing this effect. This is based on simulated data. My second point is around dynamic pricing and reliability. So I hope that anecdote helped put this in context. Let's think for a moment about how we might determine a price. When we're determining the price, we need to look at a short-term prediction of supply and demand. How many riders do we expect to be opening the app in the next, say, 5 minutes? How many drivers do we expect to be available to pick up a rider in the next 5 minutes? So can you click on the image on the right-hand side? That's actually a video of demand in New York City. And this is showing, great, thanks. This is showing over the course of a day that higher demand is red in this picture. You see a lot of demand in Manhattan and a lot more demand in the daytime than in the nighttime. So some important things here as you're doing that demand forecasting. So there's a really interesting forecasting problem here. We have to be able to pick up some of these important temporal and geographic features. But let's say we have that prediction in place. Okay, we have a demand prediction, we have a supply prediction, and I'm showing those on the left-hand side. So this is an image for downtown San Francisco and a heat map for demand, meaning predicted demand. How many riders do we predict to open the app? And predicted supply. How many cars do we expect to be open? And we need to be able to translate that into a surge multiple, which is Uber's approach to dynamic pricing. Surge multiple is a multiple over the base fare. And so, for example, if the surge multiple is 2, then you'll pay twice as much, and drivers will be paid twice as much as the base fare. So how do we do this translation from left to right, for example? Let's think about the principles behind this. So you might think, okay, go back to my Econ 101. There's a supply curve. So quantity is a function of price. There's a demand curve. Quantity is a function of price. They intersect somewhere. And then you may remember about consumer surplus. That's a measure. In our case, that's rider surplus. That's the area shown in red. And that means that under the equilibrium price, the market equilibrium, which is the dotted line, the horizontal line, that there's a certain amount of value that's being provided to riders. Okay, in this simple illustration. Again, this is not how we actually go about doing this. So look at the area in red. That's our rider surplus. The area in blue is our driver surplus. We're going to use this measure, so add together rider surplus and driver surplus, and that's called welfare. We're going to use this concept in a moment, but you might think, okay, why is it not just this market equilibrium that I learned about in Econ 101? Part of the complexity comes from the fact that drivers go through 3 states and they cycle through those states. They're either open, or they're en route to a pickup, or they are on trip. Notice that the riders are sensitive to wasted time, meaning their pickup time. Drivers are also sensitive to wasted time, meaning their open time and their pickup time. So the market equilibrium, or phrase it in terms of the price that maximizes the total welfare, is not just this particular price point, but it's a price and a pickup time. It turns out that the welfare maximizing price and pickup time combination is one for which there's not very much wasted time for either drivers or riders. And as a consequence, the drivers and riders participate at high rates, and that's why the welfare is high. So illustrating this point on the left-hand side, I'm showing an image where there's not very many drivers and there's not very many riders, and these pickup times are really long. On the right-hand side, conversely, if there's lots of riders and lots of drivers, you get much shorter pickup time, much less wasted time. And if we look at data, we definitely do see this. So on the x-axis, we're looking at we picked a particular geographic region, and we're looking on different time periods. How many open cars did there happen to be in that time period, and what were the average pickup times on the y-axis during that time period? And we can see there's this very strong relationship between the amount of supply and the pickup times. And that relates to what I showed in the previous slide around if you have lots of drivers and riders, you get these short pickup times. Okay, so where does this take us? This takes us to the point that if price is super low, then there won't be very many open cars. And if it's too low, then that means that these pickup times get long. That means the time on trip drops. That's not good for anybody, right? So not very many rides are created. And sometimes riders request rides, they can't get them. This is a poor experience for both drivers and riders. Remember, those long pickup times are bad for both. And this is shown on the right-hand side with this plot where on the x-axis you're looking at the number of open cars. And on the y-axis you're looking at how time is divided up for those drivers, right? So if you have lots of open cars or a medium number of open cars, the drivers are spending a lot of time on trip, shown in orange. But if the number of open cars gets too low, they're spending a lot of time just going and picking up passengers, which is inefficient and a bad experience. Okay, so this is an analysis that builds on this principle that was done by Castillo, Weil, and Noapfel in 2016. And on the x-axis, we're looking at price. You can think of this as a surge multiple, but this is just an illustration. So in this case, the multiple can go below 1. And on the y-axis, we're looking at the red curve is the welfare. So remember, welfare is rider surplus plus driver surplus. So how much value are we creating for riders and drivers? And you can see that when the price gets really, really low, that red curve drops off a cliff. Okay? Again, that's the welfare curve, and that's this point at which these pickup times get really long, and we're not creating very many trips. We call this the danger zone. So not much value created, not very many trips created. So notice we need to be able to keep the price above this threshold to keep us out of the danger zone. But notice that that threshold depends on time of day, it depends on supply and demand conditions. So in the middle of the night, that's typically lower than in the middle of rush hour. So if we look in this plot, the blue curve is showing the welfare as a function of the price multiple in the middle of the night in a weak market. And the orange curve is showing the same curve in the peak time. And you can see that the welfare is maximized at a lower price in the middle of the night than it is at the peak time. And in particular, if we try to keep that price above the danger zone, that you get a different price in the middle of the day and in the middle of the night. However, if we disallow dynamic pricing, okay, and we say we have to use the same price multiple at all times, and we say, okay, well, let's maximize the welfare. Let's pick the price that maximizes the welfare. That's shown in gray. That's the gray vertical bar. And you'll notice that that welfare maximizing fixed price is almost as high as the highest welfare maximizing dynamic price. Okay? So if we disallow dynamic pricing in ride-sharing services, we end up setting the price at that higher price point because we have to stay out of the danger zone in order to make sure we have a reliable service that's really creating value for riders and drivers. So this is the principle behind dynamic pricing and ride sharing, and this is why it's such a critical concept. So the takeaway is, again, the growth of ride sharing has obviously been phenomenal. It's facilitated in part by this data-driven matching and pricing. In particular, I argued that matching algorithms decrease wasted time or wait time for riders and drivers, and that dynamic pricing is key to creating a reliable, high-quality service for drivers and riders. Also, we noticed that we had to have some inputs to these algorithms. We had to have predictions of travel time in the road network. We had to have predictions of demand and supply. So super interesting statistics and machine learning problems. So the last takeaway is really that data science is such a rich field that you have these economic models and concepts that come into play, and then also these forecasting, machine learning types of models, for example. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. That was wonderful. Is there a quick question from somebody in the audience that we could take quickly? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. I have a non-technical question. So there have been some discussion last year following the blog post from an Uber employee about its workplace culture. And I've also read that Uber has made many changes to improve the workplace. I was wondering if you could talk about your experience working at Uber as a female employee and if you've seen changes in the past year. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. It was obviously a very difficult and soul-searching time for us. We took a hard look at every aspect of our culture and our processes, everything from performance cycles to our hiring process, how we were making offers and so on, and really revamped each of these from the ground up. So it's been an enormously time-consuming and important process for us. I think we've made a lot of progress. I think we're still working on it. And in terms of my own experience, actually, it's been an incredibly empowering experience for me. Uber is a place where I've always been asked to step up and achieve at the highest level that I can. And in Uber in particular, we really had a need for data science leadership. And I was coming from academia. I hadn't done that before. They asked me to jump in, and they supported me to do that. I've had an incredible experience, actually, personally, at every step of the way.
Thank you very much for answering that and giving your point of view. I know a lot of people were thinking about this, so sure. It was expected. So thanks very much again, Dawn, for wrapping up the conference for us. Okay. Very nice.